I'm Tavit Neiser. I'm a business storyteller at Yellow Bricks, and with me, I'm joined by Michelle Brooks, Chief People and Culture Officer at Security Compass, and we're going to talk about inspiring trust when working with employee data and information. Do you want to share a bit about yourself and your career?
Sure. So my name is Michelle Brooks, Chief People and Culture Officer at Security Compass, which is a software company located here in Toronto specializing in cybersecurity. Small firm, only about 150 people. Definitely some of the insights that I'm going to be talking about are going to be applicable, I think, for smaller organizations that may be in the room as well. I've also just recently started on a new endeavor where I'm doing some executive leadership coaching as well as mentoring and some HR fractional services as well. So lots of insights to bring both from my career and also from my client base currently.
Maybe specifically, we'll start with, not sure if irony is the word, but cybersecurity and trust with employees. How does that play together?
It doesn't. I think I was ill-prepared when I joined cybersecurity firm, quite frankly. It's a different persona, and I'd worked in tech for a long time, so obviously overgeneralizing, but definitely the engineering, software developer, tech persona often comes with a great deal of analytical thinking and general cynicism. But the organization that I worked with when I joined Security Compass had both the software engineers and these cybersecurity folks, and these folks do all offensive security, so it's literally their job to break the things and tell you all the things you did wrong. That's what they are hired to do, and they are the most cynical group of people I've ever met. In fact, we would have scenarios where when I first joined, there was like a big issue where people wouldn't put their data in our HR system. And they just didn't trust it, even though they had done the analysis of the HR system and were involved with implementing it. And we would be like, okay, can you put your picture and your name? And they would put their social insurance number in, and then for onboarding, and then take it out 3 days later. And we've had nothing but issues with getting people to start from a place of understanding the intent of these systems and what we were doing. And I think it took me a long time to get used to, but the one thing that I think helped was they're probably right? Like, how many of you have gotten an email about like a breach of your data recently?
Yeah. Right?
So starting from a place of like not being combative and understanding like, hey, why do they feel this way? And like, what is the information that they know about the world that maybe I don't? And starting from that place to really understand maybe where they were coming from, and then trying to meet them halfway. Like, could you put this in? Like, what's the downside of this? And working with them. So it was a tough go for sure, but we got to a good place most of the time.
Specifically, any tips or how to, in terms of asking questions, let's say demographic questions, how do you approach that?
Yeah, when I first joined Security Compass, we weren't tracking, traditional DEI demographic type of data. As I mentioned, like I couldn't get them to put their SIN number in. We certainly were not getting that other type of really important data. And so as we started to work with our diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity goals, we really were struggling with not having access to the population and knowing, where we were from a diversity standpoint, and then of course, what did that mean from inclusion, belonging, and equity. And so I admit to you that I was pretty afraid to ask this persona of folks to start doing this. And so, but I knew it was important work, and that in order to really level up the organization and get all of the benefits of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, that this was a battle that was worth at least putting out into the world and seeing if we could get some traction. And so working with our belonging committee, really raising this and saying like, hey, I would like to do this, and here's all the reasons why we think it's good. what do you think? Like, I understand there will be a natural aversion. Is this a battle worth picking? And we spent a lot of time talking about that. And of course, there was on that committee of folks, which are all volunteers from the business, there were already people from that persona group, and just like calling it out, like, hey, I know there's going to be aversion to sharing this data, but here's why it could be good. What do you think? What could we do with it? Now, of course, our belonging committee is already invested in our diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity initiative. So I'm starting with a group that has some interest in the topic and understands that data would be helpful. And so really engaging that particular group as sort of like a soft landing, getting them involved. Do you think we should do this? Why would it be good? Why wouldn't we do it? What are the problems we're going to have? And then eventually that group started to try to convince me we should do it, because they wanted this data to really support the great work that they were trying to do. And it was interesting to watch that sort of like turn. And then I turned into the natural contrarian, being like, yeah, but guys, like this is gonna cause a lot of issues. Like this is gonna be a lot of static, and we're gonna be distracting people from their business. And then eventually they were like, but Michelle, we've got to do this. And at that point, it became about then encouraging them to be the drivers of that particular change. And of course, I was there in the background and really trying to guide them on general change management and how we might communicate and how we have to spend a lot of time selling the why. But ultimately, the real power with that particular change was that there was an employee group of volunteers that were championing that change. And so, by pushing them into the spotlight, and when they hear that the same guy who would not put his picture in bamboo, he only put his nose. He was like, I met the HR criteria, I put my picture.
Oh my God.
But he's the one speaking at our town hall about why diversity demographics were really important and why it was important. That was like a real shift for us, and everyone sort of in his employee group was like, well, if he says we should do it, like I can trust that.
So he chose to be part of that?
Yeah, he did. He was already on the belonging committee, this particular individual who was deeply entrenched and cared very much about the work we were doing with diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity. And so he was part of the discussions where we did weigh it up and down. Should we do it? What are the upsides and downsides? And when I approached that topic, like, I also was okay if the answer was no. Like, I didn't approach that topic with this group with sort of that, like, I'm gonna lead them here vibe. It was like, I really would like to do this. I'm declaring my intent. Here's all the reasons I'm dang scared. Here's all the reasons it could go wrong, and let's have a true, rich discussion about how we could do this. Honestly, I was surprised that after, it took months of discussion to be clear, that we actually got to a point where we collected this data in the end. I really did expect a no, if I'm honest, but I was gonna shoot my shot and really try and convince the business and these folks that this was the right call. But ultimately, they led me somewhere even richer. One thing, just as sorry to go on, but that was super interesting is we really wanted this data so we could make sure we had, a diverse group of humans. We wanted to make sure that we could look at how engaged were different demographic groups versus not, and really identify some problems that we could solve across the business. Just looking at it with a different lens was really like my first two reasons for wanting to pull this forward. And so I thought, if we just do some diversity demographic like questions at the beginning of our engagement survey or in our onboarding process, like in our ATS, like I was like, just give me these two things so that I can hit these corporate goals. But after talking it out and truly empowering this group to make the decision, they actually decided to put it in our HRIS. And I was pretty shook. Like, they wouldn't put anything but their nose in that HRIS like months prior. But their rationale really was, well, let's go back and retest our HRIS to make sure we believe in the integrity of that system. That was a condition for them. The second thing is they really felt that continuing to ask at every engagement survey was actually going to cause more of an uproar, and that asking once and doing a big push to get the data into the system would actually create more trust and be less of an obstacle. So I was really surprised by that answer, that they would want to put it in this more permanent system. Of course, you can always change it, decide to opt out, etc. But so I was really shocked by that approach.
To me, it sounds that the trust came not only, but a lot from you coming very open-minded. Like you had a very low bar. Just give me a nose, photo of a nose, and I'm okay. This is my KPI. Like you could have gotten a no and you'd be okay with that. You never force something on them.
Yeah, I think it's hard, especially when you're starting with a committee, it's often we set, like I'll say this as a chief people officer, like sometimes we create these committees, but we don't truly empower them. And this was an example where this was their decision. Right? Of course I guided and supported and went, oh, okay, from previous changes we've done, that didn't work. Let me regroup, like here's some insights, because I have experience doing big changes such as this. But I truly had to like take my hands off the steering wheel a little bit and let them decide and trust them to decide.
That went a long way, I think. Let's talk about some more trends that we have around us. How do you see trust with the going back to the office issue now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so tired of this topic of return to office, but I will go there with you, Tovit, because I think it's important and people are still talking about it. I think that, wherever you fall in the return to office decision, I think is very personal. It also is connected to what's going on in your business, etc. And I don't think there's any right or wrong answers. I think what worries me is that it is unraveling trust. And we all learned during that time in 2020 that I refuse to say that word out loud anymore, what happened that day, or that year, pardon me, that productivity could be done from home in certain industries, not all, of course. And what we're hearing now in the news and from a lot of executives is, we need to get people back to work and we need to get productivity. And I'll quote our CFO, please don't record and send this to him. He says, I need that swivel the chair type of training. That's what he calls it. And I don't think he's wrong, actually. I think there is benefit from swiveling your chair and having a quick conversation. I actually agree. But we all did all right during that 2021 to 2022 period, right? A lot of folks who did work from home. So what is, I think, unraveling it is the mismessaging of saying it's about productivity, when a lot of times it's because you've paid for real estate. A lot of times it's because connection and disengagement is happening because you don't have some of those in-person relationships. And so one approach that we've taken is actually productivity went up. Let's call it what it is. We're a software company. People had more time, less interruptions. But what we lost was connection. And so our approach at Security Compass is we have no return to office mandate. We're encouraging people to come in for specific things like our town hall. We actually have connection days, etc. But we call it what it is. We are discovering that people are disengaged and disconnected, and we're seeing tension and conflict raise because we forget that person on that screen is a real human being with a real life and real problems, and we start to lose that sort of assuming positive intent. So when I'm making the plea, and trust me, I have to beg for people to come into the office, and when I make that plea to them, I am really being authentic that the problem I'm trying to solve is connection. And I think it is unraveling trust when we try and sell it a different way. Now, maybe in certain businesses, productivity is down. There's lots of industries for which that is indeed the case, depending on what you're doing. I think organizations that are saying, hey, we've got workers who are working on, a factory floor, and we've got office workers, and I'm actually trying to solve for equity, right? It's not cool for me to have the office workers all working from home and their jammies living their best life, where these folks have to come in. I'm okay with that as the message, but call it what it is. We are trying to be more equitable. We're trying to create a culture that is more aligned between these two personas. When we start to pretend it's something else, I think that's where we just unravel trust, and it causes much bigger issues.
Okay, another big trend coming for our neighbors, the banning of DEI, massive companies, global companies and brands stopping with that. How do you see trust unfolds with that DEI presence or exclusion?
I think it's a tricky time, right? Because maybe my view on this is a little bit different. I don't think a lot of the way we're doing DEI in organizations is working very well anyway. I think there were a lot of organizations that a couple of years ago doubled down and did a lot of work in DEI, which I love. I don't care why you did it. I'm glad you did it. It's important, interesting work that really helps communities as well as businesses. But what we're seeing now is the companies that are bailing are probably the ones who are doing it in a performative, check the box way anyway. The organizations that are doing the real work, the tough decisions, which isn't about let me just hire people who look like this, which is an important part of the equation, but the ones who are hey, let me actually look at every policy and process that I have with an equity lens and see who this is unintentionally favoring or disadvantaging, and making little tweaks that are truly removing systemic barriers. That work can continue without any dang label. And so I think what we're seeing is a trend, and it's perhaps the trend of people who were doing it for performative reasons or because it was good for brand are the ones who are dialing down, right? What we are going to see is that the organizations that are doing it with the best of intention, they're still going to find a way to do it no matter how they label it. And I think our organization has made a very taken a stand that we are going to continue doing these types of initiatives and making really clear that this was always our goal with diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, and this remains our goal. And these are the programs we're going to continue to work on and acknowledge where we had gaps, where we didn't maybe deliver, and continue to move on. So I think it's an interesting trend that I am watching very closely, but I think we also have to just be careful with the media, right? I'm definitely not going to talk about trust in media. I'm too scared to talk about that topic. But I will say that this is a very weird way to say this, but I remember on September 11th, my sister was just wee, right? 8 years old, pardon me. And this is heartbreaking. She truly believed, because my parents were watching the news, right? All day, as we all did, if you recall. And she truly believed that there wasn't just 2 planes. She thought every 30 seconds a plane was hitting a building in the world.
Because of the reruns.
Because of the reruns. So I wonder a little bit about what's happening in the media and how much of this is we're watching 2 planes hit buildings over and over and over. So when I think about trust, I'm not going to look to the media. I have a distrust for what's going on in the world in the media right now, whether right or wrong. What I want to do is reach out to people I know, people who are doing the important work, and say, what are you doing? And I will tell you this, I've been having conversations that look like this over the last little bit with people who do my job, and I don't hear a lot of stopping. I actually hear organizations who are being we can't stop. We need to actually take advantage of this moment and really double down. So I would encourage you to ask the people in your real networks what is actually happening in their organizations, and trust that more than maybe what we're hearing on LinkedIn or media, et cetera. Because I think, while anecdotal, sorry, I know we're talking to people analytics folks here, I actually think it's probably representative of what's actually happening in our community.
Leave the echo chambers. Okay, maybe some tangible advice on how do leaders or anyone here in the audience, could be juniors, people who just approach and start with people analytics. What should they do to form trust from your experience with the company and your other hats, the other companies that you work with?
You have to spend a lot of time listening and being prepared to be wrong, right? We heard that in sessions earlier, right? Like, spend some time asking the questions, getting to what's the problem we're trying to solve. And I think if you start with a destination in mind, of course you can start with that, but like, it should be, have that destination in mind, but don't feel attached to it. And I think if you start with a lot of listening, and you can start with a theory, but really spend some time understanding what's going on in the businesses that you're trying to support and serve, and be prepared to be wrong. In fact, celebrate when you're wrong. Right? When you're like, oh, this is actually not where I thought we would land, say that out loud and tell people how joyous you are about it. Because what it means is you're going to be encouraging folks to disagree with you, to give you alternative perspectives. And if you truly take the time to listen and encourage that true diversity of thought, it actually inspires more trust in that moment than any corporate communication or initiative or what you throw on your website. So listen, encourage diversity of thought, and celebrate when you learn something new.
Sounds a lot of vulnerability that you're putting there, out there. Any other tips before we're gonna open it up for questions? I'm sure you're gonna have a lot of that.
Yeah, I'd love to just jump to questions.
Okay.
I mean, happy
Let's
to.
make the time.
Yeah. Unless no one says anything, then I'll just ramble.
Do we have the mic for that woman? Thank you.
I think I can talk loud enough. I really liked when you said diversity, diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, because I haven't heard it that way. And did you just change that, or is that something that I'm not aware of?
Yeah, so when we really dug deep, probably 6 years ago on this particular topic and decided to be more intentional at my organization, I spent a lot of time researching and talking to my peer group, and labels are going to change, right? There's going to be new words for all the things. And I actually, we actually call it DIBE. You know why? Because it's just easier. Like, DIBE is just easier to just say faster. So no one else calls it that, but it's just because I like the sound of it, honestly. And the way we thought about it after doing some research, and again, listening to our belonging committee and talking to folks, was that diversity is like the table stakes, right? You have to have a diverse group of people or you're not going to get the other things. That's sort of like the foundation. You need to create environments that are inclusive and acknowledge everyone's lived experience. You need to remove systemic barriers and do everything you can to treat people with equality. And then it equals belonging. And so when we were like, should we call it this? Should we call it that? We just didn't feel we could leave out any of those things. I think the equity piece often gets lost. And to me, that's actually like the crux, as long as you've got diversity as the starting point. So that's the approach we took. And I just didn't care that it wasn't what other people called it. What I cared about is what it meant to us, what we were trying to achieve at our organization, and that we were going to be explicit about why we chose these particular things to focus on. Why I chose DIBE, I told everybody because I liked it better. It sounded cuter. And so that's the reason why we took that approach.
It's good. And when you said belonging committee, so what's your belonging committee?
It's what would be traditionally called like a DEI committee or an inclusion committee. And they chose to be called the belonging committee.
That's nice.
And their mandate is, to create an environment at Security Compass where everybody truly can belong. And they chose to sort of have their impact to be about the result of the belonging. And then they dip in and are involved with all the, diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
People are hungry.
You'll get to the food. Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you. Going back to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, what if you're entering a model where there's a specific demographic already? So building out that diversity and still maintaining the equity and inclusion. So how do you organically introduce that to a workplace that we've been doing it this way for 15 years, right?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding your question is like, okay, you've already started from a place where perhaps you have an outsized demographic. Well, first of all, I also don't think that's a problem. Like, your organization got to be the way it is and is probably thriving and doing like cool and interesting things. Like, what's the goal of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity? It is about creating a great workplace where people can truly thrive, and you should have diversity as a precursor, but it doesn't mean you need to like really in a jiffy reshuffle and look different, right? So it's about, number one, what is the demographic you have? Own it, acknowledge it. What does that mean? Is it a problem? Is it not a problem, right? And what we did when we first did these demographics a number of years ago, what we discovered is that generally we were relatively diverse, and from a racial standpoint, but we had within our Black community was a little bit on the lighter side, and we compared ourselves to the Toronto demographic, like this Toronto Stats Canada, and we were like, okay, cool, here's where we are, and here's what's common in tech, actually, and then here's what the Toronto population is, and this is where we are. Okay, what are some things we can do to not discourage these other groups, but encourage these groups for which we maybe are light on? What could be the factors that are like, why are folks from that community not here? Like, do we not have an established partners? Is there some systemic barrier that perhaps, like, I don't know because I don't have that lived experience? And so all we did is like, what's our baseline? Here's where we want to go, but you know, why? And what are like one or two things we can do to just advance? We didn't set like hard and fast goals of saying, like, we knew that the population in the should be 9%. For the Black community, we were at 4. I wasn't like, by 2026, we need to get to this. It was more like, okay, how do we improve this number? Because you don't want to also upset the apple cart in a different way and create a new systemic barrier for someone else. So we just focused on the why and how to get one step further. And over time, it sort of like settles in and out.
Okay, I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting and useful. And you're still here, right? Anyone who has more questions afterwards. Thank you. Enjoy lunch.
Thank you.